for most of that game. And so I think they're going to play really well. And, who knows? Those feelings have been proven wrong. But I'm really kind of, for the first time in a while, going into that game with a lot of confidence that it's going to be a good one.
Well, I just made a big mistake, and we were not live before that. I'm going to tell you.
I was wondering. I was going to ask you that.
I apologize to everybody out there because my wife just had surgery, and I'm not trying to make excuses like the Indiana basketball team, but my wife had surgery this morning, so I was up at like 3:30. It's open heart surgery, so I told her, Jerod Morris, he's coming on the show. I gotta make my way to talk to him, but I apologize to everybody out there because I am now 11 minutes late. But
wait, are you serious about the surgery thing?
No, I'm just kidding about the open heart surgery. It was a small procedure. It was a small procedure, but it was.
All right. Well, I hope she's okay.
All right. So let's get into it now, because at the very top of the show, and I'm not going to keep you more than an hour here, and because
chat, man.
It is. I know you have kids, and so today, like, my daughter's downstairs just bouncing off the walls, like going. She's 3 years old, and she's just like, "Oh, what's Daddy doing up there? Why can't he play right now?" Like,
Daddy's talking to his internet friends about basketball.
Yeah. This is more important than open heart surgery or anything. But so let's just go over it one more time. That we were talking about and I apologize to everybody out there, but the assembly call, where did it start? And we could just go over this again. Like, did it start with Galen? How did you make that connection with them? And then
So yeah, Ryan and Andy and I got to know each other through a site that I was doing previously called Midwest Sports Fans. And I kind of, figured or realized I didn't want to do all sports. I just wanted to talk IU basketball. And we never met, when we were in school, which was kind of random. But we had this idea to do a post-game show. And so the three of us just started doing it together. That was in 2011. Galen and Scott started Crimson Cast, I think, in 2008. And so, when we started, that was really the only other source for IU basketball talk. And Alex Bozich had started Inside the Hall with Eamon, and Ryan Carrazza, I think, was part of the founding team there.
Oh, yeah.
So you had Inside the Hall, kind of the blog and the news, and then Galen and Scott doing Crimson Cast. And so, we kind of thought, well, the niche that we could fill is after games. There's no one doing anything live, where people can kind of come together and talk about it. I mean, you could go on message boards and stuff, but there wasn't like a live conversation.
Yeah.
Let's just, let's start it. Cause I would find myself after the game being like, okay, I want to talk about this. And so, so we started it, and, really, we're really fortunate that, guys like Galen, guys like Alex, respected what we were doing enough to share our stuff with their audiences and come be guests and have us, on their platforms. And so it just kind of all developed organically from there. And 14 years later, we're still doing it. We took a little bit of a step back this season in terms of frequency, just because, a lot has changed. I got 2 kids now, married now. I was just a single guy in an apartment when we started the show. And so a lot's changed, but, those relationships that we've built together, and then we added Coach a few years later. And then, of course, with Galen and Scott, then, as we got to know them better and got to meet in person, and, really just respect everything Galen's done with the sports media department. We realized, well, we're serving the same audiences. There's some synergy here. Let's kind of come together. That's where we started the Back Home Network. And, let's kind of help each other out and kind of help grow this thing. So to make a long story short, that's it. And, it's still, as we were talking about before, it seems silly sometimes to get on here and talk about a basketball team, but it's the community that is built up around it and kind of the shared experience, which is so hard to get elsewhere, that kind of always brings us back, and makes it really feel like something meaningful to do, even if the specifics of what we're talking about always aren't that meaningful.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I appreciate you coming on. I mean, yeah, I love I found you guys I was just like mowing my grass one day, and I'm like, I want to like listen to something about IU, something like that. And I think at that time you were doing the Thursday shows like every day or whatever. And I found that and listened to you. And I mean, you're great. Like, really great radio voice and your monologues. I mean, I appreciate all the content. When I first
Thanks, man.
listened to it, I thought, man, this guy put some real work into this. And I was just happy to find it. And then kind of later on, I found YouTube and like the comment section through that and everything. And yeah, just really appreciate
Thanks, man.
everything you do. And for coming on here today.
Well, and I just, if I can hop in real quick,
Yeah.
one of the things that I think is nice is, always trying to kind of do something different, right? And do it at a high quality, which is what we've always tried to do with our show. And that's been the thing about your show that I've been really impressed by. I think your show is really, for what you do on YouTube, the editing quality, all that stuff, like it's kind of new. It's a little twist on what else is out there. And that makes it a more rich environment because everybody can kind of get exactly what they want, and there wasn't really anybody doing that to the level you are. And so it's great to have that added now to just this, kind of incredible cornucopia of options that people have for their IU sports content. And that to me is awesome because someone may not like us as much, but they really are attracted to your content. And that's how it should be, and so it's great. So I'm glad you're part of the, the whole community of IU content creators.
Well, thank you. I mean, some people don't get what I do. I mean, I did stand-up comedy for 4 years, just about every night, about, I don't know, probably 600 shows or so. And so I view it really as a performance. Like when I turn the live streams are harder to do it that way just because it's not, but I view it like I get so emotional about it. It just comes pouring out once I turn that camera on and I got it all going.
But you can tell that. That's the thing. And I think audience members react to that because there's a genuineness, there's an authenticity to it, and that's what people connect to. So keep it up.
Yeah. I've loved it since I was young. And, for people our age, a lot of the people I talk to in the comments that are like Gen X type age, like in their 40s, because I didn't remember the 87 team, I was 5 years old then. I really remember like 90, 91. And coming into like Chris Reynolds and building towards that group. And for the people,
that's the name you're going to cite. That's the name you're citing from that era.
I love Chris Reynolds.
I love it. Most people would have cited some other names. I'm glad Chris gets some shine. That's awesome.
Yeah. Great guy too. He's like the head of the Big Ten, Chris Reynolds. I think he went to law school and whatever he's done. He's done really well and stayed in basketball, but we had that big letdown of the Henderson knee injury and the 93 season. And then we kind of just kind of tapered off through the 90s there for whatever the case may be. I think our coach was getting older. I think the players were changing. Was kind of like what it was like in high school when I was in high school. People got a little bit more self-righteous. And so, it's like that. There's definitely a lot of people out there that want to experience that, what it was like in 76, 81. I mean, to win 3 national championships in 11 years.
Yeah.
But let's go into talking about, the Ohio State game coming up, senior night coming up. I have seen that it's going to be, Goody, Leal, Galloway are going to give speeches, but, what's your prediction? And I know this team, it's like so hard to predict what you're going to see, but what's your kind of like overall feeling coming into this game? And I just looked up Ohio State. We've beat them 5 of the last 6. So it's like, I got a good feeling there that we've had their number.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously beat them on the road. And I think they were missing one of their better players that game. But that was a really important win for this team during a stretch where they really weren't playing very well. It's been really hard to get a feel for this team or really for this program over the last few years. And honestly, the last couple of years, the feeling has been kind of negative, and I try to stave that off as much as possible. But, I like the way that they've been playing over the last 5 or 6 weeks. And I feel like we're in this kind of weird period where, okay, we know that there's going to be a change. There's going to be a coaching change. And so none of us have to really be worried about that. Like, we know that's happening. We know that this season isn't exactly like up to the standards that we want for IU basketball, but because change is happening, and I think because the team is playing better and they're playing harder and they're playing more together, like they're playing the way we want to see an Indiana basketball team play, I think it's been easier to fans to say, okay, you know what? I will meet you where you're at. Yeah. Meet you where you're at. Let's see how much we can make out of this season. which I think is that's certainly the mentality I've tried to have, and I appreciate all fans who have tried to do that, because I think it's helped the team and fans come together a little bit. Where for a long time this season, it's like, I mean, you remember, the talk before the Michigan game and the Maryland game. It's like, are they going to boo the team out of the stadium? I mean, that's, we can debate, like, should you boo, should you not? Should fans be upset? Should they not? But when that's the narrative, like, it just, as someone like you who grew up going to the games in the 90s, and it's like, man, we are all pushing in the same direction. And we know what this arena can be like when everybody's doing that. It's like, man, this is what things are like. It feels depressing. So anyway, for them to now come back and beat Michigan State and beat Purdue and, win some other games and, go out on the West Coast trip. They got done what they had to get done, which is at least split, and they played fairly well against Oregon. The execution down the stretch wasn't great. But what I saw coming out of that game was absolute fire from Coach Woodson, which I love to see.
Yeah.
And I think that, combined with it being senior day and the last game for Anthony, the last game for Trey, probably the last game for Luke Goody in college, unless he gets his medical waiver, those guys are so respected in the locker room. And you can tell because everybody raises their level of play when those guys are on the court. I just think this team is going to come out, and who knows how they're going to execute. That's always the big question.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be 40 minutes of effort and fight and just laying it all on the line in what could be an elimination game. We don't know for sure, but it kind of feels like it could be for the tournament. I just think it all adds up to Indiana playing a great game. And I think if they do that, they're better. They're good enough at home to beat Ohio State. It may end up being a close game because Ohio State's talented too, but I think it's going to be a really good performance by IU, and they're going to come away with the win. And it's been hard to kind of have that gut feeling, but I really kind of feel strongly about that as we head into this game, which is nice. And I think the team has earned a little bit of that confidence with the way that they've played.
Yeah, I do feel like the pressure's been lifted a little bit. Like, since, they announced that Woodson's not coming back, and I don't know what he thinks sometimes, but I mean, it seems like he's done a little bit where he's like, okay, I'm going to bench Mbako and bench Balo, and we need Leal to be like, we need the guys who are going to play defense out there. I mean, Leal is going to be a big factor in this game, playing defense on Thornton, and he's a big factor in a lot of games where he doesn't show up on the stat line, although he gets inside somehow and gets a couple of buckets a game inside. But I do feel like the weight has been lifted a little bit, and then maybe having a little bit more freedom for Woodson to play whoever he wants. Let's talk about Mackenzie Mbako for a minute, because, I mean, here's a guy that I'm really kind of baffled by entirely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when he came in, just kind of watching his first few games and stuff, watching how the guy shoots, looking at, and I mean, he's a monster. I mean, just physically, you get up by him, you're like, man, this guy can really do some damage. But you see that maybe the motor is not there. And I know, I mean, to play in the NBA, it's a lot faster game than college. I mean, it's 24 seconds. You see the ball moves. I mean, what do you think about, like, his motivation, or just kind of how he's developed at Indiana? It's kind of been baffling in my mind how he hangs his head and the coaches don't keep him engaged. Nothing seems to work when it goes bad for him.
Yeah, I share the disappointment, because I had really high hopes for what he could be this year after really coming along last year. I thought Mike Woodson handled him really well as a freshman.
Yeah.
Held him accountable early in the season when he wasn't playing well, but then kind of brought him along, and he played well toward the end of the season. You think back to that Maryland game last year, he was just tremendous. And he opened this season really, really well. But, he's been a guy, and we've seen these guys in IU basketball history, and really on any sports team you follow, where it just kind of feels like their mental approach to the game, or maybe their emotional approach to the game, kind of ebbs and flows a little bit. And I always, hesitate to criticize a guy for that, or try to get inside of his head, because we're not inside of his head. And so we don't know all the different things that may be going on. We just see the 40 minutes on the court. Yeah. And that's all that we can judge. Yeah. And I think you see the physical tools, the size, the shooting mechanics, like all that stuff. And it's like, that's a guy who should average 15, 16, 17 points a game, who could do that. And, for whatever reason, he hasn't, but he wouldn't be the first guy to kind of struggle as a freshman and sophomore, and then maybe something clicks as an upperclassman, and it gets going. So I mean, I'm right there with you on all the disappointment. And I think sometimes, I mean, shoot, you think back to, to some of those teams that we grew up, following. And I
Yeah.
feel like there wasn't. Now with some guys there were, and maybe I was just too young to realize it, but it didn't feel like there was always so much pressure on freshmen to come in and
I
be
know.
great from day one. Like,
No.
Greg Graham, right? I mean,
Yep.
he struggled. It was either his freshman or sophomore year when he got reamed by Bob Knight.
Yep.
For, are you going to recover, Greg? If you're not going to recover, Greg Graham.
Yeah.
And then as a senior, he's Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year and is one of the best guards in America, right? So it can take guys some time. And I think Mbako, to me, seems like that kind of guy. And maybe something clicks for him as an upperclassman. But he's the kind of guy that could go out. You saw what he did at Purdue. He could go out on Saturday and score 25 points and lead Indiana to victory. And when he does that, he really raises the ceiling for the team. But, when he's not scoring prolifically and his defense is ebbing and flowing from a focus and attentiveness perspective, he can also drag the team down. And so I think, you mentioned, it seems like Mike Woodson is seems a little more free now to, hey, Mackenzie, if this isn't one of your good offensive games and you're not there fully defensively, I'm playing Goody and Leal and some of these other guys. And to Woody's credit, I don't know if that's so much, he knows he's not coming back, and so he's not playing the politics part of it, which is what some people have said. I think, honestly, every season, Woody has done that at the end of the year. The frustrating part is,
it
takes him so long to do it that we've kind of buried a hole, and this isn't the NBA where you can take 20 games to feel it out. So you
got to hit the ground running in like November. I mean, you got to figure this. Like, I listened to a lot of stuff of Matt Painter. He's like, he had that stuff figured out like August 1st. Like, this is how guys are going to be arranged. And until somebody can prove to me they can play defense or I can trust that. That's what it is to me more. It's like in the NBA, you don't really trust players. They're paid. So
they're professionals.
You don't have to trust them.
Yeah.
If they don't perform, the general manager is just going to be like, well, look, you're sloughing off. You're not getting up and down the court. You're out of here, so you don't really have much to do with that as a coach in the NBA. Yeah. Where in college, you're looking for guys with like a high motor that are able to kind of like play a role sometimes.
Yeah. And unless you're developing a young rookie, a lot of times the players and the professionals, especially role players, are more mature. They understand their role. They've kind of figured out, okay, how do I approach the game the same way every time? Yeah, Mackenzie's a sophomore in college, and he hasn't reached that level of maturity. Not going to say that he's not going to, because again, it happens for some guys later. But I think that's been the conundrum for Coach Woodson this season. You got to ride him when he's hot because he's the best individual scorer Indiana has when he's going. But I think having a quicker hook when it's not his night is beneficial for this team, because Anthony Leal is not going to come in and give you 20 points, but he's going to do all that other stuff that Mackenzie doesn't really do that helps the other players be better. And on those nights, that helps Indiana be better.
Yeah, that's where you're like in between a rock and a hard place. It's like, if this guy doesn't score 25 points, he's a liability and can't really be out there. And Leo, you're going to get this type of effort. Also, he's not going to just jack up shots or do that is one thing, and a lot of players on this team do this, is just kind of like have like a predetermined, okay, I got the ball now. This is what I'm going to do. And it's not really like I see Mbako do that. I saw Rice do that in the last game, where you just see kind of like he drove into an opening. He's like, I'm going to take this shot because I'm open. There might be 20 seconds on the shot clock or 15, but it's not kind of part of like an overall plan where the coach is like, these next 2 possessions, we're going to do this. Then we're going to like go outside and, kind of, I like to see teams that wafer back and forth, between that a little bit more.
Yeah. Shot selection has been an issue. I think, of all the things that I struggled with during Mike Woodson's tenure, that's really been one of them to me, is shot selection, taking more mid-range and long twos than we should. I mean, it's kind of opinion. It's also kind of mathematical fact at this point, unless you're just elite at making those shots, and we're not. And it's a fine line. You want guys to be confident so they can shoot and make shots when they're open. But hey, Kanan Carlisle, maybe the first time you get in the game, don't chuck up a 3 and then don't come down
chuck
and
up a shot.
make up for it with another shot. I know you want to make a play for the team, but there might be a better shot for us to get. And that's something where I think coaches can have a big impact. And it's probably been, like I said, one of the things that's frustrated me the most, watching us play, because oftentimes it feels like, boy, that wasn't the best way to maximize that possession.
Oh, it is. And, I've been watching a lot of the SEC this year. It's like, I mean, those teams, when you drive in, you make it physically difficult for the defense no matter what. You're just barreling in there. I mean, when you watch Auburn, you see guys just take the ball like a football and just go like rolling right into the lane, and three guys hit the deck. It's like, yep, that's happening every possession. Like, when you do that, and then, you complement that with some threes, and it doesn't have to just be big guys doing that. It's guys that go off the dribble. And
I mean, to me, it's the biggest thing this program has to fix. And obviously the next coach is going to be in charge of fixing it, is you've got to have guards and wings that can beat you in multiple ways. Yes. Right. So you look at a lot of those SEC teams, they can make outside shots, they can drive, and when they drive, they can find the open guy. Like, I was looking, I saw, CJ Gunn had a big game for DePaul the other day. And so I wanted to check his stats and see how he was doing.
Yeah.
And so CJ this year, and they play obviously a lesser schedule than Indiana does, but, he's using 24% of their possessions, which is a fairly high usage rate. Yeah. And his offensive efficiency rating this year is 103. And I was like, wow, like that number seems high, but only because, like, we've kind of been looking at guards at Indiana over the last few years. That's actually higher than any Indiana guard in the last 4 years. We have not had a guard with an efficiency of over 102.2 that's used that many possessions in 4 years. When you go back to the Indiana teams that competed for Big Ten titles, Yogi Ferrell's efficiency in 2016 was 124, and he was using like 25% of possessions. Victor Oladipo was 122. Even Yogi's freshman year, right? You think back, and what was the narrative? Man, Yogi's inefficient. His offensive efficiency was 105. Even that year, it was better than anything that we had. And the thing is, so the last Indiana guard to do that was Al Durham. Al Durham, in his last 2 years at Indiana, his efficiency was like around, I think it was 105 one year and 108 the other year. And the reason is Al, for all of his faults, was able to drive. He was able to get to the free throw line, and he could make threes at about a 37% clip after struggling his first couple years. And so he wasn't elite, but he's more the prototype of the guards Indiana needs. You've had guys like Xavier Johnson, who for the most part was pretty good at getting into the lane, but wasn't always great at finishing.
Yep.
But when Xavier was really going well, like you think back to the end of Mike Woodson's first season when Xavier was rocking it, he was making his outside shots, he was getting into the lane, and he was throwing lobs. And it was like, okay, that's a guard you can win with. The best teams have 2 or 3 of those guys. And Indiana might have one guy doing it for a short period of time. You're just not going to win at a high level like that. And so for whatever reason, whether it's the guys Mike Woodson has brought into the program or kind of a post-centered offense, stifling the ability to drive, lack of shooting development, like whatever it is, that to me is the biggest problem that this new coach has to solve, because you're not going to win without elite guys on the perimeter like that.
Yeah, no doubt. And but I mean, part of it, Mike Woodson, partially kind of like got screwed because Archie Miller did not do a good job at coaching offense at all. I mean, it was like, I always thought Rob Finney was a guy that had way more potential than he ever did. He never really developed confidence with an outside shot. You can like remember the Butler game or like the Purdue game where he hit a couple of big shots, but it's like, where was that? I just saw him as a player coming in. I thought, okay, this guy's going to like develop into a shooter. He's got a good looking shot. He's like pretty good, like with both hands coming in as a freshman. And but the coach has to, he's got to kind of like stir like a soup up in a guy a little bit sometimes and be like, hey, you can do this, like you're just as good as that guy. You're just as good as him. Like drive in on him and dunk on him, which Rob Finney did a couple of times. And I was always like, man, where is that all the time? But
Rob definitely had one of the weirdest careers in IU history. It was like he was like the Benjamin Button of basketball almost, because he played his best. Like those first 10 games of his freshman year, I distinctly remember, like you think about the Marquette game, and of course he was a freshman at the same time as Romeo. I distinctly remember us having a conversation. did we finally find our next great guard since Yogi? Is this the guy? And then he's the only guy I've ever seen. And I hate it. I mean, it pains me to say it because I love Rob. And the game he had against Purdue is honestly one of the most emotionally satisfying experiences I've had watching Indiana basketball, because I wanted it for him so bad.
Yeah.
But his offensive efficiency went down all 5 years he was in college, with like dropping to its lowest when he transferred to Cincinnati for that year. And so I'm sure, you know, some of it is coaching. With Rob, it kind of felt like he got that concussion his freshman year and lost his confidence and could never quite, you know, get it back for whatever reason outside of, you know, an out-of-body experience like in the Purdue game. But I thought Coach Woodson really did a nice job of finding a role for Rob that year, where it's like, okay, you're coming in, you're running the second unit. You know, a college basketball team should have a second unit. That's another question.
Yeah.
You're going to go pressure the ball and be the defensive stopper. And when we need defense, we're going to put you back in. And I thought he really responded well to that and played some of his best basketball. But yeah, I mean, you've got to have those guys develop. And so with Archie, you know, whether it was missing on recruits, you know, just not having an infrastructure for player development. And I sometimes wonder if that's an issue with Woodson, where coming from the pros, you're getting finished products. You're not so much worried about player development. You're worried about what can you do now to win games now and fit in with the stars on our team. It's just a different paradigm. Yeah. And it feels like, you know, Tom Crean, for all his faults, was a phenomenal development of players and skills.
Yeah.
And that is something I'd like to see happen, because it doesn't feel like there's a lot of guys whose skills have gotten better during their time at Indiana. And I would like to go back to seeing that.
Yeah, you definitely, you know, and let's like start going into, you know, talking a little bit about the coaching search, but it's definitely like when your coach is bringing in guys like OG Anunoby and you like never heard of this guy, and then you see him like really like, you're like, wow, what a diamond in the rough that guy was. You know what I mean? Like, where'd you find him? You know, I feel like as Indiana fans, we're always feel like we're sitting on the outside looking in. I mean, I was just talking to somebody yesterday. I'm like, you know, we were sitting here talking up Miles Rice while Greg Gard at Wisconsin goes and gets Tonji, and that guy is just tearing it up. I mean, for Wisconsin, and they're playing a totally different style. But I'm like, you know, that's kind of what you want your coach to see, that like, oh yeah, he identified this guy. They got rid of Storr and Hepburn, and then they bring this guy in, and then all of a sudden he's just lighting it up, and you're like, all right, here we go again.
And Greg Gard's adjusted his approach. You know, he realized that he either had a comment this offseason or last offseason where it's like, hey, we've got to be better offensively, because offense is what wins now. You know, and so he's changed. And now Wisconsin has this prolific offense, you know, and it was, you know, a little bit of self-preservation because he was feeling the heat, but that's what good coaches do. You've got to adapt and evolve. And I think that's another kind of frustration Indiana fans have had, where it's like, boy, it feels like we've just been stuck in the mud for 8 years and we keep doing the same things over and over and over again, which is where so much of the frustration comes from.
Gard is one of my dark horse candidates. I don't know why. I mean, there's a couple out there nobody's talking about, but I could see, you know, if there was nobody, I mean, just what Gard's done there, and I could see him being a guy, or Chris Collins. I've like just a couple weeks ago, I was doing a bunch of research about him, and I mean, he's got a deep coaching background. But who are your main guys? Like, tell me kind of like where your tiers are, starting with like your top two, and who you like to see the most that you're kind of like researching. Or
this coaching search has been strange, you know, for all the ones that we've had, you know, and even at a time last year, you know, when it felt like there was a realistic chance, you know, that Indiana might move on last year, I was fully down the rabbit hole, like all the way down as far as you could go. Give me all the rumors, give me all of it, and I'm going to consume it all.
Yeah.
And I've really taken a different approach this year, partly out of necessity and partly out of not exhaustion, but just, I think, recognizing how little actual information there is about this. And so, you know, my mentality here has been, look, I'm going to develop my preferences over time. But Scott Dolson, I'm sure, has been thinking about this for a while. They're paying millions to a search firm to vet these guys. You know, there are elements of what it's going to take to succeed in this job that you can't see on a Wikipedia page or a Ken Pom page. And that lesson was learned very strongly by Archie Miller, who checked a lot of boxes. And then he gets in here and it's like, oh man, this is not the right fit.
Yeah.
You know, and I think, you know, Mike Woodson checked some different boxes, but it hasn't been the right fit for a specific, you know, for a variety of reasons. And so my overall feeling on the coaching search is I trust Scott. And so if you tell me that this is the guy to do it, I'm in 100%, no matter what my personal thoughts on it are. So that's kind of how I'm approaching it. And so I haven't dived in quite as much. That said, I have dived in some because, you know, I mean, it's still Indiana basketball. And to me, I keep coming back to the Big 12 coaches. And I don't even know which ones are viable candidates. Like, is Bill Self going to leave Kansas? I don't know. If he wanted to, come here, you know? I think guys like Otzelberger, Scott Drew, Grant McCaslin.
Otzelberger is really at the top of my list. I mean, I don't know really. I've talked to a lot of people there, but I really never get a name of like who said Chris Beard would not be the coach. I think that's just a general consensus that I think some of the board of trustee people are putting out there. Like, but besides that, I mean, Otzelberger just really. I think he's you know, it is personality. I don't know the guy personally. So yeah, with Archie Miller, it was like, you got to be a community leader. You almost got to be like the pastor of a church and like all these different, you got to wear so many different hats to be the IU coach. He just wanted to coach ball.
That's what Galen has always said. It's almost like a religious figure in the state of Indiana.
Yeah,
like a papal figure. It is.
I mean, yeah, Kent Sterling. I mean, I remember him saying, he's like, you know, he yelled out to Archie Miller. He's like, hey, Archie, you know, he just turned his head and just kept on walking. Like he was in assembly hall, like walking out a door. It's like, what kind of guy just like, you say his name, you know, and he like just doesn't acknowledge you at all. He just is like, I'm out of here. They actually called him Archie as a kid because he was, even as a child, he was so like angry all the time. They said it'd be like, oh, he would just be like, when he learned to walk, you know, his brothers and stuff would come around and be like, oh, don't mess with him, you know, just.
Yes. So, yeah, we need a coach whose personality is more like Archie Andrews, not Archie Bunker.
Yes.
I think is the lesson there.
And Crean, I mean, he had the personality. I think he had a lot of stuff going for him. I think people thought, well, we can make a step up, and then it just ended up being like 8 years of mediocrity since that time, which is unfortunate. But
yeah, the Crean thing is so interesting because, you know, he did a really good job rebuilding Indiana from where it was. And I will remind people, everybody who says Indiana fans are so unreasonable and so impatient, we basically set aside expectations for 3 seasons, 3 full seasons with Tom Crean. No one expected anything, so he could rebuild it. Remember that when you criticize the fans. And then built the most fun 2-year stretch of Indiana basketball since 92, 93, honestly. I mean, those teams were great. Obviously, they didn't win at the level we wanted them to, but those teams are great. And the 2016 team came around, you know, and some people say, oh, you know, we needed to give Crean another year beyond 2017. At the time, it felt to me like it was time to move on.
Me too.
It actually felt, I mean, it was starting to feel like that way early in 2016, and then they turned it around. But I remember being fully on board with it. And it is easy in hindsight to look back and say, well, gosh, look at what's happened since then. And yeah, it may be true that sticking with Crean for these last 8 years may have given us more success than what we got with Archie and Woodson. We'll never know. It's counterfactual. We'll never know. But the thing I come back to is, you know, Crean went to Georgia and they didn't win at all. I mean, they were terrible. And so I think it's perfectly reasonable. It's the way that I approach really appreciate Crean's tenure and the teams that he gave us. And I hope they come back, honor those teams, and he gets the standing ovation at Assembly Hall that he deserves. But I'm not on board with the revisionist history that we shouldn't have moved on. We just made the wrong choices. That's the problem.
And like a lot of the insiders tell me, you know, he kind of burned up a lot of his recruiting. He just wore people out in state. And that's really what kind of like, people wanted the more IU guys that come, you know, in-state guys, and he just kind of with the Indiana elite in different circles, he was just, I mean, I heard like Cody Zeller is like, he was calling their house like all the time and stuff. And finally his dad was like, look, I mean, this is the exact opposite of what Mike Woodson does. Their recruiting is like, he's like, look, we're coming. You don't have to call like every other day or whatever, and try to eat dinner with us, but
yeah, very,
but
very different personalities.
no doubt. But I appreciate him. Like, he understood the Indiana fan. Like, he understood all of the pageantry of it all. And you go to the games there and everything, like it's intense. I mean, every person in there is really keyed in on basketball in ways where, I mean, I went to tons of games at Madison Square Garden, and I thought, like, this isn't like basketball, like not even close, where they call that the Mecca of basketball and all this stuff. I'm like, this isn't even close, like people don't know basketball
Gus Johnson
at all.
always calls us the Carnegie Hall of college hoops. Absolutely. Crean, I think he was the right guy at the right time for the job that he was asked to do, and he did it. And they were good years, but I still think it was time. We haven't made the right choices, but that doesn't mean that we can't reflect really positively on those years. Because, man, you remove that from the last 30 years of Indiana basketball, and it's even more of a barren wasteland than it's been. So,
and that feels like it was just yesterday. Like, beating Kentucky in the tournament in 2016, that was a great moment. And he kind of had his ups and downs. You can learn as you go. That year when they brought like Noah Vonleh in, I kind of thought, oh, could he replace Zeller? And but they're going to need more leadership because Halls was gone. But you kind of learn from. Do you want to Rutgers is learning from this right now. Do you want to bring in the difference between top end talent and guys that are going to be 4-year, just hardcore Indiana basketball guys? You got to find the right mix of that. It can't be one or the other. Let me get your take on this. Like, I mean, some coaches more like, to me, Painter, what he does, and a lot of people say, well, they should do that in Indiana. I don't think what he does would work 100% in Indiana because we have access to higher talented players. Purdue doesn't have access to those higher talented players, in my opinion. They can't go entice somebody somewhere to, hey, like, come to Purdue for this reason. You just don't see it happening. But the difference between coaches that just play, look for role players to play in a system, or kind of just look to develop like each and every player, like to be well-rounded basketball players, like, and that's going to go into the coaching search a lot, like in people's brains. I think that's why no matter what name you throw out there, it's like half the IU fans are like, oh, no, you can't bring that guy in. And the other half are like, well, yeah, that's a guy could do it. But, just tell me, what direction do you like to see it more going?
I mean, well, first of all, I would love, in the alternate universe where Matt Painter could potentially be the coach at IU, I would love to see what he could do at Indiana. Because I think you're right. There's some different recruiting philosophies, I think, part out of necessity, but also part just because of, I think, Purdue's culture. And the ironic thing about Matt Painter is, he's never, and really Purdue as a whole, is they've never really gotten the huge recruits, and yet they've had players develop into some of the best college basketball players of all time. I mean, growing up, Glenn Robinson is the most dominant Big Ten player I've ever seen. He was ridiculous. And then you see Zach Edey, and now you see Braden Smith, and none of these guys were supposed to be superstars, but they've developed, and Matt Painter has a great vision for them. And he gets role players that support those star players, which isn't always easy to do. To me, the right way to do it at Indiana is you've got to have some guys that are your foundation. Like, Trey Galloway could be on a great Indiana team. He should just be the 7th or 8th guy, not your starting point guard. So I think you want some players like that. The Anthony Leals, guys that really are the backbone. Maybe they're not playing as many minutes as they are on this team, but they serve a valuable role. And then, look, it's a different environment now with the portal. So I think you've got to be smart about having guys in your program who develop and hopefully building good enough relationships to keep them. And then what I thought Bob Knight's greatest genius always was, well, I mean, there's tons of them, but one of his greatest geniuses was knowing exactly what player and mentality he needed to kind of complete that team. What skills do I need? Okay, do I need a center who can pick and pop? Let me go get one. Is he going to have to play right away? Then that should be a portal guy. Okay, there's this elite talent in state. Okay, we're going to go after him. If we get him, what pieces from the portal do we like? That's the problem with Rutgers. You would never say no to Dylan Harper or Ace Bailey. Those guys are ridiculous.
No, there's
the players around them that aren't good enough.
Yeah.
And that's the thing with Rutgers, with Peichel, is they've built these teams that had great infrastructure. They didn't always have a star, but they had guys who fit together well. And now they have the star talent, but they don't have the other pieces to fit together well. And I think it sometimes at a place like Rutgers, you can only get one or the other, because if you're blowing your whole budget on Bailey and Harper, now you don't have enough to keep Omarugi and to keep some of the other guys that you need. At Indiana, and look, this is where I think fans can sometimes get in trouble. We know the resources we have and we want our cake and we want to eat it too. But like we want a coach who can do that, and I think it's fair to keep trying until you find that guy, because I think you can win big here. And so to me, I want a guy who's shown he can do that. That's why I like the idea of Scott Drew, who has brought in high, a value freshman like VJ Edgecombe, but has also used the portal well, because that's what you need to succeed annually here, because you're going to have to rebuild your rosters if you're getting really good players. And so
he develops guards like just
that's the other thing.
Is like just unstoppable guards.
Yes. Yeah. And so, to go back to the Purdue comparison, what I like about Purdue, they play a good team style. It's obviously a very fun offense to watch. I think Matt Painter adapts really well to individual seasons and to his roster.
Yeah.
And so give me all those elements. Like, I'd love to see those here, but I think the roster building would and should be a little bit different at Indiana. And that's why we hang banners and they don't. So,
no doubt. I mean, they're satisfied with, I guess, a runner up, and they're still kind of bragging about it. And I can see they're very scared right now, because they know, they're like, oh no, they're going to get a coach. This could be it. They're going to get a good coach.
Oh yeah.
Then we're going to be playing second fiddle again. And
they all know. They know.
Yeah.
They know what the normal, how this state normally is. We're just, if we would stop futzing around and, make the right hire, then we can get things back to the normal order of things.
I was reading, Rick Bozich had a great article, kind of just like recapitulating everything that we know, which we know nothing. But it was like, at the very end, he said, it could be one of these guys, or it could be somebody that nobody's talking about at all. I mean, I guess that's where I look at, like, could Greg Gard be a guy they're looking at? And like, we don't even know that. We wouldn't even know. But I think just Dolson, he's just so tight-lipped. I don't think he's just a guy that's going to talk. And I do believe in him. I think, of all the people, I mean, he's been there. He watched them win a championship as a manager, in 87. And so, I mean, of all the people in the state of Indiana that would like have watched all this stuff play out from up close, I mean, he's got the best like bird's eye view of like what worked with Archie and what didn't, and he was sitting there, and what worked with Crean and what didn't. I was listening to something yesterday, and they were talking about, I was on a Jim Coyle show.
Yeah.
And just kind of something I hadn't thought about in a long time, but how, the Kelvin Sampson thing went down, because we were talking about, how we had like the 3 years, but IU did really like just skewer themselves. And I was kind of comparing it in my brain to like, what Jim Harbaugh did last year. He's cheating. He's got glasses on, he's somewhere cheating us. If they would have kind of overall just kind of lawyered up, deny, and try to see like, okay, is this really, because they changed that rule the very next year. I mean, it was, I guess, a stupid rule to begin with. He was breaking the rules, but I do think that just kind of like set the table for a lot of people saying like, oh, Indiana, nobody wants to be there or whatever.
Yeah. I spend a lot of time thinking about this, and there's sometimes I know, there are some times when I just come back to the idea of Obviously there was a path to handling all of this better after the departure of Bob Knight. But there are sometimes I think, you know what, this was all kind of inevitable after the Bob Knight era, just because of, because you think back to those days, like it was like, we're going to be awesome. We're going to have the best tactics on the sidelines, and we're going to do everything by the rules. And that's how we do it. That was the culture of Indiana basketball. We're going to beat you, and you're going to cheat trying to beat us, and you're not going to be able to do it. And Kelvin Sampson came into that environment, which is what made him being hired so weird in the first place. It's like, wait, we are? It was like, and I fully bought into all that stuff, like growing up, and even at that point, I was like, wait, we're hiring a guy that cheated us?
Yeah.
And and Scott's made this point on Crimson Cast. It's like, if you're going to do that, right? And I go back to Breaking Bad, right? Jonathan Banks with his speech to Walt, no more half measures. You used a half measure. You should have used a full measure. If you're going to hire Kelvin Sampson, then you support Kelvin Sampson. Now, it wasn't just the rules. There were some cultural issues on that team. And I think he's learned some valuable lessons and done things differently and yada, yada, blah, 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 all that stuff. But it was just so misguided in every way, and I think that's been some of the frustrations. Like sometimes Indiana sports have made these decisions and it's like, well, that was doomed to fail. Like, why did we do that? What were we doing? And that's where the Cignetti hire just seemed to really, like, it's almost like that era of Indiana sports is over. Not that Cignetti's a rule breaker or anything, but we're going all in on this.
We're going to be competitive there. And
yes. And now with basketball, again, I don't, like people talk about Will Wade, right? And the argument against Will Wade is, well, he got a show cause at LSU because he broke these rules. And people will say, well, yeah, but those aren't rules anymore. And that is true. And so I think we need to recognize that. The issue with a guy like Will Wade is, but if you knowingly break rules flagrantly that are rules at the time, there's still an integrity issue. And you still have to work in a department with people. And there's still going to be some kind of rules and protocols that you're going to have to follow as a coach. And so, who is this as a person? If you're breaking a rule because it's, you're sliding a guy under the table $1,000 because his family needs it, who gives a damn? But if you don't have integrity and you're just looking out for yourself, well, now that's something that as an AD you have to look at, because you've got to put the program first. And that's where, to me, I throw my hands up and say, it's hard for me to judge a guy like Will Wade. Maybe he's changed. I don't know. That's the job of the AD to vet him. But I get kind of the arguments on both sides of it. I just don't feel qualified to chime in because
he's a lying, cheating fool, in my opinion. I kind of like read about some of the scenarios he was in. I'm like, oh man, this dude is real gangster, I mean, he's like,
I know,
looking for like a sucker born every second, and he's looking for him, but it's hard to this day and age, there's like cameras everywhere, and just so many things are more under the microscope. I mean, Bob Knight could not even coach in this age. I hear a lot of people, and I think these are really a lot of Purdue fans that say this, but like how Indiana's not a blue blood and Indiana's not these things. But if you look at Alabama football, they were, really great. They had that great coach there through the 80s and the 90s. If you go back, like look at their records, they were not good for a long time until they got Nick Saban. I mean, they were not this powerhouse school ever. But as soon as that right coach walked into the door, and that is like just a hotbed of recruiting, like all through that southern region right there. And Alabama is like the number one school to play at, which to me in the Midwest, if somebody comes in and changes Indiana, brings in the culture, it'll be that just like day one again, because we're right in the middle of where people around here still love basketball. I actually went to a high school game the other night, and I hadn't been to a high school game in forever. And it's just great because people were coming up. We were just talking about the game, and I'm like, oh yeah, people still love it the same way.
Man, I'm with you on this. I think Alabama football is actually the best historical comparison for what Indiana basketball could be, right? Because it's almost the same time frame. I remember I did a
Yeah.
banner moment about this a couple years ago. Like it's almost the same time frame, and you had, I think it was, they had that one little period with Gene Stallings where they kind of popped up, won a national title, which could have been Crean in
Yep.
2013. That team
Yep.
obviously just didn't go all that far, but it was very similar. And it's like, oh,
Mhm.
here's this little reminder of what we can be, and then we're back in the wilderness again. And then you get Saban, and it's holy crap, it's better than we even thought. I
Yeah.
100% agree. You make the right hire at Indiana because the resources, the support, that stuff's going to be the same. Just, you know, they hired one of the greatest college football coaches of all time, you know, so can we do that now? That's, can we, you know, who is that guy? But if you can find that guy, I mean, I don't think you're going to find the Saban of college basketball. He's pretty special.
Yeah, he is a pretty special
but,
guy. I mean, it's just
but
with
if
him,
we had 85% of Alabama's football success,
yeah,
you know, we'd all take that. So who is that guy?
no doubt. It's just work ethic, accountability. I mean, it's just I view it really. It's like the fundamentals of life. You know, it's like, I mean, even in just like Bob Knight's book, it's like, are you where you're supposed to be? Are you doing what you're supposed to do? Like at all times, are you thinking that way? Like, I think Indiana players, you know, in the past had that mentality. They're like, we're here. This is like a really important thing that we got to play basketball here.
Yeah.
And letting people know that. I mean, I think Nick Saban let people know that at Alabama is like, I was just watching a thing with him where it's just all about trust, conference that he did. And he's like, you know, I tell the guy we're doing this drill, put your hand on the line, put your hand behind the line. And the guy puts his hand on the line. I said, put your hand behind the line. It's all about choices and decisions. It's like,
Yes.
I'm not going to trust that guy
things.
to not be looking into the backfield, you know, because he's questioning whether or not when I told him to put his hand on the line. And that's kind of what it boils down to with sports or business or anything. It's like, you know, do you trust this person 100% to do the job that you kind of like hired them to do? I mean, now these guys are making money, so you hired them to do something. They got to perform.
Do your job. Attention to detail. Sounds like another coach at Indiana right now who learned under Saban, right? Kurt Cignetti.
Yep.
Terry Morin is very similar. The great coaches, like they don't always say the same things, but it rhymes. The themes are similar. And I'll tell you the other thing too, that I was just thinking about that when you were talking about that. And I think this is part of the cognitive dissonance for Indiana fans, where it's like, we're so used to, or at least a lot of us who are a little bit older, right? Like you and me, and we weren't necessarily around to remember the championship years, but we got enough of the end of it. And we've heard enough people talk about the championships that like I have to remind myself, oh yeah, I don't even really remember those moments. But you think back, it's like, even as far back as Branch McCracken, it was on the cutting edge. It was revolutionary basketball, the Hurricane Hoosiers. When Bob Knight came along, the motion offense, we were setting the standard for basketball, right? And it was offense, and it was fun. And the last 8 years, it's been like, I mean, we're behind the times. The offense is bad. These things that we felt were fundamental about IU basketball, the ability to shoot the basketball, playing hard, togetherness, toughness, they haven't been there. And so it's like, it hasn't just been the losing. It's how the losing has occurred, which is what I don't think national people who like to swoop in, you know, and give their flyover takes on Indiana basketball, which aren't worth 2 cents because they don't really know what they're talking about. You know, that's what frustrates me, because it's like you got to understand the mentality of Indiana basketball fans, and I think we come by it honestly because we've seen it here, and so that's what we want. We want to win, but I think we also want to have a feeling that like we're kind of important in college basketball because we're helping to set the standard. We've seen it twice here. And honestly, to a certain extent, Crean was doing some of that stuff with the position of basketball, the way he, you know, having Thomas Bryant step out and shoot threes. Like there were lots of parts of Crean where it's like, we're at the forefront of offense again. And then it's like, we just went in the dark ages for 8 years, you know? And so all that stuff matters. It's not just the losing, it's how the losing has happened. And I think that's where now this hire, but no one understands that more than Scott Nelson. You know,
being forward thinking. I mean, that's hard to do because you're going to be taking more risk. But I just was like talking to that guy from Peegs about this. Yeah, when you said that Branch McCracken, the very first year, they used to have to before the Hurricane Hoosiers, they would tip after every made basket. They would go to a live tip. The first year they didn't do that. He was like, "This is what we're gonna do. We're gonna play like if you're not running full speed from end to end, and then you're not gonna play." Like he would bring guys even off, and he'd put them at the end of the bench because that's how he rotated guys in. He's like, "You go to the end of the bench. You didn't run hard there, so you're there until another guy gets ready." But yeah, that forward thinking,
that,
you know, even
that mindset still works.
Yeah. Even in 87, you know, you took the 3-point line was really getting implemented, and we won that because we could bury threes. In Indiana, I mean, you know, even Isaiah Thomas said this. He's like, "I couldn't shoot in high school, but he's like, I knew I had to know how to shoot when I was going to Indiana, so I just made myself. I'm like, I can't play there unless I can shoot."
You talk about 87 too. So what is a game that all the old heads mention about 87? They talk about the Final Four game against UNLV.
Yes.
Why? Because Indiana, again, for the last 8 years, we go into every game. It's like, we are going to do what we do, and hopefully what we do can win. But if it doesn't, we're just going to lose because we can't adjust, right? And so we're playing this UNLV, this run and gun UNLV team with Mark Wade and Freddie Banks. And everybody thinks, okay, Indiana's going to try and slow this game down. What does Bob Knight do? We're going to run with them, and we're going to beat them at their own game. And they adjust, and Alford hit 9 threes that game or 8 threes or something.
Yeah,
he went
nuts. Him, and it caught him so
and
off
it's like,
guard.
Give us, like, let's have some strategic elasticity. Let's feel like we're going into a game. Hey, I don't really know exactly how to judge our chances because we're going to have a coaching advantage. How much is that going to matter? You know, we haven't had that. So just, you keep bringing up all these things.
Where we punch them in
we
the
haven't
mouth.
had that for the last 8 years.
I love the story Joe Hillman tells about that. He's like, because they were getting ready for that UNLV game, and they were going to play, you know, the motion offense and the regular offense. And then like Joe Hillman said, like, you know, Knight walked in. He's like, you know, all that stuff I said about valuing each possession, throw it right out the window because this is what we're going to do. And it's like, you just start writing on a board, you know, it's like, that's what you want out of a coach. It's like, okay, this is how we're not going to beat this team doing this, you know, so we're going to have to go, you know, a different direction. But well, I'm gonna wrap it up here. I just heard the garage door open, and my wife is home from the hospital. So
wow, open heart surgery, and she's back after a few hours.
Yeah, pretty fast recovery time. No, she was having a procedure done. I mean, not all procedures are done, but I was there super early, so I apologize to anybody that logged in and you know, was waiting there for 11 minutes there. But
yeah, it was not open heart surgery, by the way. That might have been a joke that we had before we went on air. So just to be clear.
But either way, it was great to have you on. I mean, subscribe to, you know, the Back Home Network and check out, you know, Jerod Morris on Assembly Call. After the post games, you see everybody there. So
I always appreciate the invite. Thanks for the invite to come on. Really enjoying what you do, and I hope lots of people, you know, find your work and enjoy what you're doing. Because, like I said, you're doing it in a different way, and that makes this space more interesting. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much for that. Appreciate you coming on as well. And with that, well, stay classy out there, Hoosier fans.
Sounds good.